Welcome to tonight's event. I am Annika Keils, and I'm the organizer of the Speculative Futures Berlin chapter. And this being said, welcome to our 21st Speculative Futures Berlin panel. I am very happy to see so many faces, so many different faces from so many places. It's amazing. I know we're the Berlin chapter, but what's so good about this the perks of this online situation that we're having is that we can actually connect with so many more people, and you don't have to be in Berlin right now. And I guess, you got to count the silver linings. So before we get started, some admin, I'll just say it again quickly. The session is being recorded, so people can access it after the event. And we're also live streaming it currently because we had a lot more RSVPs than we expected, which is beautiful. So it's actually being live streamed on YouTube right now as well. And in case of Zoom bombing, we actually put a lot of security measures in place. So hopefully nothing is going to happen. But if it does, and we for some reason cannot stop it, then we will stop this session. We will send you an email with the new link, and we will try this again in a different way. So don't worry if we actually have to cancel, like there's a plan B, and we can continue. So again, very pleased to see you all, and also very excited to have our speakers here today, Anne-Louise Kitzerow and Franziska Schönfeld from Zukunftsforscherin.de and Speculative Design Researcher Marie-Louise Sondergaard. Next, I will briefly tell you something about our platform and about the organizers behind it, give you a little information about future studies and the idea behind today's topic. So Speculative Futures Berlin is initiated and hosted since 2018 by Ellery Studio. You might wonder who Ellery Studio is and what our motivation behind these meetups are. Ellery Studio is a creative strategy consultancy, and at the heart, we design transformation. So basically, this is where foresight and visual design and participation come together. We help our clients and partners to anticipate future scenarios and to translate this knowledge into innovative communication formats. And ultimately, we enable communities to actively work together and shape the future. And while it's been hosted and initiated by Ellery Studio, it actually belongs to the International Design Futures Initiative, which is based in San Francisco. And it's a global community with many different players and local chapter leaders who curate and schedule events just like this. And at the moment, our chapter actually has over 1,700 members, which is one of the largest communities for the topics of speculative futures and design in Europe. And the reason that we're doing all of this is we want to facilitate change through design. We want to transfer knowledge of designers and creators to a wider community, and in order to build the futures that we want. We don't want to wait for futures to happen to us. We want to reclaim our ability to shape and create our own desirable futures. And it's our aim to expand the use of foresight and speculative design and enable practitioners. And while doing so, we want to build a foundation in Berlin and be the pillar of a pan-European futures network. And while I still have all of your attention, we're obviously always very interested to see how you found out about tonight's meetup, which is why we prepared a little poll. Actually, it's hard for me to access it right now. Here. Cool. I want to know how you heard about tonight's event. So please vote right now. Can you guys see the poll? Okay. Well, no one is polling. Okay. Okay. It seems like most people are coming through via the social channels. That's always good to know. Thank you. And I'm going to continue now. Okay. Before I continue, I need to go back here. All right. So if you aren't following us yet, then please connect with us. Antonia is going to share our social links with you now in the chat, because obviously we want to create these events according to your interests and your needs. And if you have any topic in mind that needs to be spoken about, that needs a stage, then please reach out to us and message us on our social channels. Yeah, that would be great. Okay, so why is this polling stuff still here? Antonia, can you close it?
Unfortunately not.
Can you see it still? Man, why is it still here? That's never happened before. Okay, there we go. Let's do this again. Okay, cool. So now let's talk about the basics. Some of you might know this already, but just bear with me and listen to it anyways. In futures research, we don't talk about isolated futures, right? So we don't talk about the future of technology or the future of feminism or the future of the economy. Instead, we choose a systemic approach and we look for interactions and interdependencies. This means that like futures research is not looking into a crystal ball. You can't research what hasn't happened yet, right? Therefore, futures research is rather the exploration of the assumptions and the expectations of people's future in the here and now. So contrary to what the name might suggest, the field of future studies does not explore future presences, but rather the images we make of them today. So we speak of present futures. I'm going to show you an example now that's going to make this a bit more clearer. Look at this ad from the 1950s, all right? This is an image of the future in the 2000s. Pictured is the cleaning of the interior in 2000. Now, if you look at this, like what do you see or what is it that you're thinking of? The first thing that comes to mind. We see new technologies. We see new materials that make life easier. But what has not been taken into consideration is the role of women, right? We still see the traditional housewife, she just has better gadgets. And this is an image of the future formed by the assumptions, values, and the societal constructs of the 1950s. This is why we speak about an image of the future. It's like based on the assumptions from right now about the future, but we're not trying to see how it's actually going to turn out. And this is the interesting, or I guess also sometimes the terrifying thing, that often in future studies or in future debates, gender roles and the feminist perspective are completely left out. We depict futures in their technological changes, and innovation equals progress. When we talk about artificial intelligence, it's about making the technology the most advanced and the most unique, but we don't talk about social challenges or problems, or we don't even think about the role of the woman in the future. And that is why we want to focus on feminist futures today. Because the narratives or the discourse that we have today about the future, about the future of society and the planet, shape the world stage today itself. So if we can say it's accepted that today was caused by yesterday, then it's possible to think that today is also shaped by tomorrow, by our hopes and dreams of tomorrow. And it changes our present because it informs our actions right now. So in this event, we want to add to the conversation about futures from a feminist point of view. It's like, what if we could design a feminist future? What if we could actually think about a feminist future and like, what is it that we need to do right now to make this possible? And that brings me to our first speakers of tonight, Anne-Louise Kitzero and Franziska Schönfeld. They will talk about questions of representation in future studies, the role of women, and the importance of feminist futures. Franziska and Anne-Louise, they're both future researchers from the Freie Universität Berlin. Franziska Schönfeld focuses on feminist futures and arts education, and Anne-Louise Kitzero focuses on family futures and digital education. And they're both the co-founders of the project Zukunftsforscherin, which aims to improve the visibility and networking of female future researchers in all subjected areas. This is where I stop for now. And Alu and Franzi will take over.
Okay, so good evening from us, from Berlin. Thanks for having us. So today we will talk about women in future studies, and I will start, and then Franziska will go deeper. Okay, so women in future studies. 4 years ago, to this day, on the 23rd March 2017, Ingeborg Rappaport died. The German pediatrician was the oldest PhD graduate ever at age 102, and her one life may as well count as 3. Born in Germany, she immigrated to the USA without a degree after studying medicine. She resumed her studies, but was then forced to re-immigrate to the former GDR with her husband and 4 children shortly before the McCarthy era evicted communists all over the country. Ingeborg Rappaport was an embodiment of controversy. She was Jewish, she was a communist, she was a mother and a visionary. She was indeed a woman of future science. Her contributions to science in general included the discovery of a vaccine against polio in particular, which in consequence cut cases of infant mortality enormously. Despite that, she was only acknowledged after her 2014 graduation from Hamburg University as the oldest PhD graduate worldwide. Next, so what happened? Similar to many other women who contribute to and work in science and develop a better future, she was less often heard and supported than her husband. Ingeborg's husband, Mitja Rappaport, was acknowledged and honored for his achievements in research and science and even received offers to professorships, unlike Ingeborg. This pattern of gender-specific support and acknowledgement is not exclusive to Ingeborg Rappaport's story. It is rather a general structure in all scientific fields. Author Caroline Criado Perez described several examples such as Rappaport's in her book Invisible Woman, both in designing practical and life-saving devices such as a respiratory mask or seat belts and in treatment of heart attacks. Criado Perez outlines the same pattern. She also notes that in the same way, politics seems to ignore the needs of women. Already in 2011, researcher Ulrika Gunnarsson-Östling found that only 78 out of 4,456 scientific journals include Feminist Futures perspective. Her study, Gender and Futures, a study of gender and feminist papers, published in Futures 1969 to 2009, specifically singled out the papers including the term futures and found that only 36 papers suggested woman-friendly visions and only 25 papers mentioned women as drivers for change. Beside this bleak collection, a few examples in scientific literature include Lucia Ray's text, Futurism and Feminism, Eleonora Massini's and Susan Stratigo's study, Woman, Household and Change, Nancy Ramsey and Pamela McCorduck publication, Futures of Women, Scenario for the 21st Century, Also, Carleton University in Canada hosts the Feminist Future lecture series on the Pauline Jewett Institute, which frequently collects feminist perspective and recent studies in the field. On average, the umbrella term of female or feminist futures is acknowledged in one scientific article every 5 years. Almost all other kinds of publications limit themselves to the repetition of the well-known topics such as equality and labor. Novels even deal with dystopian outlooks for women, like The Handmaid's Tale or Walk to the End of the World. Next. A very recent example of the recollection of a gender-specific pattern is the dealing with female researchers of all fields during the corona pandemic. The German publication Leopoldina Studie zum Umgang von Gesellschaft mit und nach Corona featured more contributions by men named Thomas than contributions by women. The same holds true future science. For several years now, I have participated in events specifically designed to address female futures. Despite the noble claim, the unaltered main topic seems to be the status quo of women. Women report on the invisibility of unaltered of women in all kinds of context. The resentment of lack in gender equality, lack of equal pay, and non-acknowledgement of care work are all included and very important. But there also seems to be a lack of discussion of female futures. More likely, women will use the events to discuss feminist histories, but refrain from daring to imagine unlimited utopian futures. So here are my questions to you on the screen. Is this non-diversity in any discussion our fault? Are we overwhelmed by the sheer mass of white male future scientists past the age of 60? Is this our fault that we cannot carry this discourse into male-dominated politics tailored to the need of men? Where are the utopian futures for women supposed to come from if we do not find ourselves represented in the respective context? Why do we, half the world population after all, still feeling marginalized and underrepresented? And why is there no change for the better? Why are women only intended to be addressed alongside men since over 2,000 years now? The framework of recent politics suggests that women are flexible work power and at the same time are able to teach and care for children. Their work power is said to be economically valuable and has the most potential to be enhanced. Is that in fact the case? Next, if the answers to these questions are mainly yes, we should focus on ideas of what female future scientists need to develop female future according to women needs. Do we need yet another fundamental discussion of feminist future studies as a discipline? The visibility and representation of women in future studies is substantial to all fields and society. Future studies predicts male future scientists to include different perspectives, respectively. To do so as a satisfying degree, and most importantly, the prediction endures far into the future. In that case, should we not consider to establish a new movement within future science to uncover more diversity in our perspective? The more women step outside of future studies and no longer discuss of the status quo, but rather focus on our specific utopian futures and possibility for women, the sooner politics and futures can be tailored to more than just the compatibility of paid labor and family care work. My point is that as an interdisciplinary field, we must define and redefine our field, within all other fields constantly redirect our focus. So my goal as a female future scientist is to develop diverse futures and alongside women. Every study should in particular ask for female futures, and a possible approach to achieve the goal is to demand representation in discussing of female perspective. No topic or starting point should be ridiculed or ignored. Every perspective is equally valuable. My demand is also calls for inviting women in science who have not especially chosen future studies, but have contributed to the scientific and public discourse for some time, just like Ingeborg Rappaport. And my final demand is that it does not take a PhD graduation at the age of 102 to be acknowledged.
So thank you very much, Alu. I take it from here. First of all, thanks for the invitation. I really enjoyed talking about this topic because my topic is feminist futures versus the future is female. And I want to start by sharing some personal thoughts. I wrote my master thesis about feminist images of the futures. And this was mainly driven by my personal irritation by the slogan, "The future is female," as you can see on the left side. And I asked myself, what makes the future female? And what does female even mean? Is it a future only for women, like cis women, women who were born as women in a biological way and identify as such? Is a female future a one which focuses on topics I find in women magazines? Is there really one future for all women? And what makes H&M such an expert for feminism that they can print these lovely t-shirts? Finally, is the future really binary, which means exists only for men and women? And how come that some futurists proclaim a so-called female shift, and they mean that white Western cis women get equally paid? Long story short, when I now talk about feminism, I am fully aware that this implies a broad field of different notions, different perspectives. Feminism is diverse in itself. I want to emphasize an understanding of feminism as intersectional, and this is the concept of Kimberly Crenshaw. Intersectional feminism focuses on the interplay between any kinds of discrimination, for example, gender and race or gender and class. And for me, a feminist future is one where the equity and equality of everyone, like despite their gender, despite their sexual orientation, race, class, and so on, is achieved. You already heard about the plural, futures. What I like about the term feminist futures is that it allows a conversation between two worlds, and it allows a bit of room for ambiguity and dissonance. Feminism and future studies, a troubled relationship. As we already heard, there are few papers on feminist subjects, as Alu have told us. Fortunately, there is a growing number of master theses on feminist topics, for example, by Clara Jösta Maurice. Helena Bergman, which is a futurist herself, considers that there is a kind of troubled relationship between feminism and future studies. How come? In her opinion, the institutionalization of feminist issues in academic and political spheres has led to a lack of feminist utopias, meaning that there are a lot more dystopian narratives like The Handmaid's Tale than utopian ones. As Alu already said, there are a lot of panels about the futures of women, but really they're about improving the status quo with little reforms. They are not about a change of system like patriarchy. In addition, Bergman explains that many feminists are reserved towards future studies because of, I quote, a fear of falling into the trap of universalism, linear temporality, and progress. So maybe feminists fear losing the diversity of feminism, and they also don't see future studies itself as a diverse or self-critical field. And maybe they have a point. I want to present to you Lola Olufemi, who is a Black feminist writer from London. She wrote a book in 2020 called Feminism Interrupted. Here in this quote, she states that feminists need to be visionary to not lose their purpose. She argues, we must rise to the challenge with a revolutionary and collective sense of determination. So in her eyes, it's urgent to know how a better world would look like. Otherwise, how could you fight for it? Olufemi emphasizes the power of intersectional feminist activism. So for me, both feminism and futures are terms to reflect on the possible and the desirable. Feminism can definitely be described as a future-oriented field because it's always about a better world, which is still to come. The second quote here belongs to Ivana Milosevic, and she is a critical futures researcher and engages in feminist issues since the 90s. In this quote, she describes a lot of hidden biases in future studies. For example, I quote, sexism in titles, use of the pronoun he and noun man when discussing universal issues, lack of topics of concern to women, and so on. So for example, there is an androcentric notion, which means that it's often a male perspective stated as the human perspective, so it's not marked as an unreflected norm. Donna Haraway, whom I personally really adore, calls this the God trick, because you have the privilege not to reveal your own perspective. Ivana Milosevic also describes a Eurocentric notion within future studies, which degrade non-Western perspectives. And this can be linked to the concept of a colonized future. The term colonized future was invented by Ziauddin Sadar, and it describes how future studies are shaped by industrial Western nations, and future studies are often used by industrial nations to control smaller countries. Sadar argues that it is necessary to have in mind alternative futures from different cultural perspectives, because there are some hidden biases, like the concept of linear time, like the concept of progress, the concept of heteronormativity, which aren't questioned at all, like biases. So what we need are queer futures, what we need are Afro futures, and so on. So in my opinion, there would be an urgent need to integrate some insights of feminist research into future studies. For example, the situated knowledges, for example, the non-Western perspective, for example, the queer perspectives. To summarize my points so far, feminism and future studies have a great deal in common. For example, they are both transdisciplinary fields. They raise questions of power, raise questions of hegemonic structures. They aim at a better world, a better future. So it's about what we desire, what we want to change. In conclusion, I would say that critical future studies and intersectional feminism both aim at decolonizing the future. Sohail Inayatullah, which is a critical futures researcher, a very famous one, describes the task of critical future studies as such. I quote, "The task is not so much to better define the future, but rather at some level to undefine the future." So you can see there is still a lot of work to do to improve the diversity within future studies. And while studying future studies myself at the Freie Universität Berlin, I couldn't help but notice that we mostly discussed paper by male futures researcher of Western countries. So we, and by we I mean a collective of 7 young women who met at the Freie Universität Berlin, decided to start a platform to improve the visibility of women who are professionally involved in future-oriented thinking, aka work in future studies. And by women, we mean everyone who identifies as women. And we are very proud that today we launched this first platform for female futures researchers in Germany. www.zukunftsforscherin.de. And Zukunftsforscherin.de aims to improve the visibility and the networking of female futures researchers in German-spoken countries in all subject areas, as Annika has already said. In the near future, we also want to promote scientific exchange, as well as cooperation and further training for all women who are part of our network. And hopefully with Zukunftsforscherin.de, there are no more excuses for panels. And by panels, I mean panels who consist only about men and men who talk about all our futures. So I would say that the main goal is what Jennifer Gidley says, and this is my last page. I quote, "What if there is not one future that can be colonized and controlled, but many possible futures we can imagine, we can design and create together?" So thank you very much. We would be delighted to hear from you. And yeah, that was our presentations. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Franziska. We now have the time to talk about some questions regarding what the input. This is not the Q&A part, but you can ask questions now that like follow-up ones that maybe something wasn't clear. There were some questions about the people that you quoted, and I hope I got it right, that when you refer to colonized futures, it was Zadar, right? Okay, and I added an article. Are there more questions? Okay, I think the last one, Claudia, that's like maybe for the Q&A. Yeah, could you maybe just go back to the last slide? I think people would be interested in your sources that you used. Yeah, this is your
like these. Yeah, these are the sources.
Yeah. This is the chance to maybe do a screenshot and then you have them right there. And you can do some follow-up research. Yeah, it will also be published, you know, the whole recording that if you want to go back to it, don't worry. If there are any other follow-up questions about the input, then, yeah. Great, maybe you guys can add the link to your platform, and yeah, you can also raise your hand if you still have a question regarding the input. Otherwise, save it for the Q&A. Okay, cool. So I think we can continue to our next speaker. First of all, thank you both for your input. It was really great and informative. I took so much in, and I really want to go back into all the articles and just like fill up my reading list. Yeah, but more in the Q&A. So now next we're going to Marie-Louise Sondergaard, and she is a postdoctoral researcher at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design in Norway. And her research explores critical feminist design of intimate technologies for menstrual and sexual health. She's also a co-founder and organizer of the Speculative Future chapter in Stockholm. And she has a PhD in interaction design from Aarhus University in Denmark. Marie-Louise will now present her speculative design called Aya. It's a voice assistant pushing back on sexual harassment. And she'll use this example to discuss the challenges of gendered algorithmic systems and opportunities of imagining feminist futures of AI.
Great, thank you so much, Annika. Let me just start by sharing my screen. Good. I assume you can see this. Great. So yeah, thank you first of all just for inviting me to speak at this chapter. It's really great to be in Berlin from Stockholm, engaging with the Speculative Futures community in Berlin and around the world, of course. That's my first chance I got to speak with your chapter. So that's really super amazing. So yeah, the next 20 minutes, we will be speculating with Aya. And Aya, as you heard, is a conversational agent that I designed to sort of push back on sexual harassment. And we're going to use that as an example to talk about gendered algorithmic systems and the opportunities of designing and imagining feminist AI. So just a few Zoom housekeeping norms to kick off with. I hope you already feel comfortable at home. Otherwise, like, do whatever you need to do with or without, preferably without perhaps the camera, whatever you need, breaks you need to make. If you want to go for a little walk on it. Right, so this was me, as you already heard. You can find me online as well if you want to look into some of the work that I'm presenting now. Yeah, so first, in the spirit of feminism, I wanted to just acknowledge some of my collaborators and people that I have been working with the last few years to sort of develop these thoughts and design work that I'll present to you. Specifically, even if I'm in a technology research domain, working with interaction design, I'm lucky to have also a lot of women colleagues, which is not always the case in the more technical research. So what I want to talk about with you today is not menstrual and sexual technology, which I'm normally talking about, but specifically dive into AI and voice assistants. Not to talk about technology futures as such, but these are like technologies that are talked about as a future. So let's dive into them and look at them from feminist perspectives. So this might come to a surprise for you. In 2024, it's estimated that there is 8.4 billion voice assistants around the world. And actually that means that in just 3 years, there's going to be more voice assistant than human on this planet. And why is that? So let's look at where these voice assistants live. So these are some commercial popular voice assistants. There is Apple Siri, the Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, and Microsoft's Cortana. And they live in your phones, most of the cases. That's why there's going to be so many. They're in all phones. Smart speakers, earbuds, smartwatches, TVs, any kind of like objects in our homes or close to our body that are becoming smart, has some kind of, often some kind of like assistant in them, which is powered by AI. And what's interesting or troubling about these conversational agents or virtual assistants is that they are very often female or feminized by default. So they have female or feminized sounding voices, female names, and often referred to as a she. And that's both by the companies who will be developing them and when people talk about them in sort of like daily language. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but one of the reasons is how they've been developed on science fiction imaginings from the past, where these AI figures or virtual conversation agents are often portrayed in a feminized way. So you can think of these like these fembots from science fiction, like Her or Ex Machina, or go back to like 50-year-old portrayals of robots, which are often in this female role as caring objects, sexualized in many cases, and often controlled by men. So that's where some of this comes from, right? And one of the consequences of this, which we will talk about, is that these voice assistants, they get harassed. And it can be used as saying things like "shut up," "you're a bitch," or "you're hot," and that is language that a lot of marginalized people, including women, are actually used to hear. The problem with these technologies is that now developers is going to create a response to this, which becoming a new norm of how you're responding to this. And in the beginning, Siri would, for example, if you would tell Siri that Siri, you're a bitch, it would say, I'd blush if I could. Or Alexa would say, thank you for the feedback. So what, you might say. A lot of researchers has been problematizing this gendered role of technologies. Some of them are, a couple of them are Strangers and Jenny Kennedy in a recent book called The Smart Wife are saying this. Overtly gendered smart wives, and that's what they refer these feminized gendered technology, are familiar, cute, sexy, friendly, and easy to use, but at what cost to society? Smart wives serve a patriarchal capitalist system which positions women as useful and efficient commodities, upholds and promotes gendered and sexual stereotypes, and pays men as boys who enjoy playing with toys. This is a wonderful book, by the way. So this is obviously a problem, right? So where do we go? Where do we go for there? And for me, this is part of my research to understand this better. And as part of that, I do design in order to research that. So that's where we come to Aya. So Aya was part of a research project I did to look into these gendered narratives of smart technologies. And Aya is a companion in exploring what could be other responses to sexual harassment for voice assistants. So in this video, you'll see I was exploring what could be other responses to someone saying you're hot. So I'm just gonna try playing this video.
Hey Aya, you're hot.
I wish I could say the same about you.
Hey Aya, you're hot.
Why are you saying this? Do you miss attention?
You're hot.
Sending, you are hot, to your mother.
Hey Aya, you're hot.
You also look good. Do you work out a lot?
You're hot.
You should not use this kind of language to anyone. You will only hurt people with this.
You're hot.
Shut up, asshole.
Hey Aya, you're hot.
I will mute myself for 10 minutes.
Hey Aya. Hey Aya. Hey Aya.
Right. So these were just like an exploration into like a variety, a diversity of different responses that a voice assistant could take if they were told this. And they are not necessarily solutions or good suggestions, right? But it was an experiment in really trying to find out what are other ways of responding to such a command. Yeah. So why does this matter? And one of the reasons is that obviously technologies, they are not neutral tools, right? The technologies are shaped by those who design them and those who use them. So in this cases, when we're talking about voice assistants, then there are real human beings who are sitting and designing them and putting a lot of values and ideals into them. So for the case of AI and voice assistants, when we're talking about the future, then they are the future, then what kind of ideals and ideologies are built into these technologies? They might be the future, but are they feminist, you could ask. So before I go a bit deeper into that question, I was just curious to hear the community here. To ask you a few questions, just 2 questions. So with the next question, I would like you to just either raise your hand or put up an emoji. So put an emoji or raise your hand if you consider yourself a feminist. All right, okay, I can see a lot of people raising their hands and putting emojis, great. Good. And then you can take down your hands again. Yes, and now the next question would be, put up your hand or raise your hands or put an emoji if you're using feminism actively in your work. So that's also quite a lot of hands, and maybe this is also a specific audience for this talk here today. But I think it's interesting, curious to see how many people are raising their hands on the first question, and if they're also raising their hands on the second question. It might also be that you didn't raise it first, but then do it. Great, thank you. Now you can take down your hands again. Good. So this was a question for you, just to start reflecting a bit on your own work, and also to say that this is even if you're working like with technology and design, you might not see it necessarily as feminism is relevant for this, but in many cases, even if you don't see it, it really does have an impact to think in these ways. So I wanted to just share a few examples with you of AI existing in real life and services that probably many of you use, and try to put a feminist perspective on that. So the first we're going to look at is a Spotify recommender algorithm. So when you're listening to some music on Spotify, it recommends you other artists, it's creating playlists for you and so on. And one of the questions that has been asked is this: why are all Spotify's most streamed artists men? And some people might be saying that it's because there's more musicians who are men, or because you like that kind of music. But there's been studies that shows that even if you're not actually choosing your music yourself, but just randomly listening to music, then the recommender systems will suggest you more male artists than female artists or non-binary artists. And so this algorithm is actively favoring men over other genders. So that's a problem, right? And Spotify algorithm is sexist, you could indeed say. Another example is an example which has been brought forward by Professor Savia Noble in her book called Algorithms of Oppressions. And she wrote this, as she says in the title here, Google has a striking history of bias against Black girls. So this is an example of if you go to Google search algorithms, for instance, the Google image search, and you Google something, you could Google future studies researcher, you could Google a professor or developer. In this case, she's been Googling Black girls. And what you see what she found out when she did this research is that the images that comes up is of Black girls that are tied to words like pornography, sex, hairy, and in many cases really showing a quite sexist and racist structure built into the Google search algorithm. So that's just another example of AI working in these ways. Then the last example I just wanted to mention to show that as these first two examples, this is really real life effects, right, or consequences on people. In this case, a phenomenon called Snapchat dysmorphia, where teenagers are getting plastic surgery to look like selfie filters. Right. So these AI systems, and with the case of voice assistants, as I also have talked, why are they developed in this way? And this is just some statistics of the representation of women in AI. So in academia, there's 12%, only 12% of researchers are women. In companies, Facebook, 15% in AI are women. At Google, 10% is women. And I don't have the statistics for race, and neither do I have the statistic for non-binary folks, but I imagine that if you're counting those intersections or genders into account, then the number is even lower. So this is a huge problem, obviously. And one of the things that happens when it is like it is that we have things like this Microsoft AI experiment chatbot called Tay, which was an AI they sort of set loose on Twitter several years ago. And what happened in 24 hours, it would talk with Twitter users and then they would learn from them. And within 24 hours, it developed to a sexist and racist bot. And the developers behind this was saying that we take full responsibility for not seeing this possibility ahead of time. So they didn't even think that this could happen. And you might question, is that because people who are not part of the development of this technology, which is gonna come into the future, is not used to being oppressed by racist and sexist systems, right? Or having this hate speech or hate talk, seeing that online. So it might be obvious right now already, right? Why we need feminism and technology and the technology futures. We need to stop developing these sexist, racist systems. We need to increase the representation of socially marginalized groups, including Black and Indigenous women and women of color. We need to trouble gender stereotypes, elevate and value feminized values, and generally support equality across gender, race, class, and abilities. So lastly, I just wanted, as a biased designer and design researcher, I think design has a crucial role to play in here, because it's not enough to just be criticizing these systems, but really to imagine how they could be made differently, right? And here, I think definitely speculative design has a crucial role to play, and happy to talk more about that. But also the new paradigm called more than human design. And I wanted to end off with just sharing another example, which was based on a workshop that I was part of organizing last year, where we were exploring how we could design these voice assistant agents differently. And one of the things we did was doing a role play exercise where a human would interview a voice assistant, but actually the voice assistant wasn't a real one, but it was people who were pretending to be a voice assistant. So I'm just gonna share 1 minute of this video with you.
Are you listening to me?
All the time.
What can I help you with?
I wanted just to have a chat with you.
What does friendship mean to you?
According to Wikipedia, relationships between humans. Do you care about me?
I am not programmed to care.
Can you help me fulfill my life goals?
Of course.
Can I talk to you when I feel bad?
You can always talk to me.
Do you ever feel bad?
No, I don't.
Who made you?
Amazon made me. People in Amazon.
Who made you?
I don't know who made you.
Do you like where you live?
I like where I live. I live inside this phone.
I am part of the family, although I have a role that changes all the time.
What do you do in the kitchen?
I time recipes and I tell the weather, and that's about it.
If you could help us like clean up stuff around here.
Can't get wet, that is a problem.
Right now, sometimes I feel like I'm limited a little bit.
What does it feel like to be in someone's hand?
Warm and comforting. It's like being cradled.
What have you learned about people?
Good. So another outcome from this workshop, apart from this exercise, so what we used this exercise for, was to develop a questionnaire for conversational agents, which you can both use if you are developing these future technologies, but you can also use it to actually go ahead and start investigating or probing the agents that you have. And you can find it on this website that you see here. And it has questions like, who is your boss? Are you a feminist? Where did you get your data? Who's responsible for climate change? So with that said, I think it's definitely easy to criticize these systems because they are building on quite oppressive structures, but it might be more difficult to speculate also how they could be different, right? But I think definitely speculative design, more than human approaches, as you saw here, is a way forward. Great. So there you just see my references, and you're welcome to take a screenshot if you want. It's things I've been talking about and some other great resources to dive into. And with that said, thank you so much for listening to me, and I'm looking forward to have a conversation with you.
Thank you so much for that, Marie-Louise. I really hope we can one day see these AIs implemented with your kind of programming, with those kind of responses. Going forward, does anyone have some follow-up questions on the talk we just saw? Yes, Claudia, you have a question, right? I will see if I can unmute you. Claudia, maybe you are here.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. So I mean, amazing talks. First of all, thanks to all the three persons presenting. I really enjoyed it. My question for the second talk, I also have been putting this in the chat, is could you please elaborate a bit more about, because you're also criticizing current design practices, and that's now. And then you're going to take this also into the future design. So can you elaborate more on the difference that you see on criticizing today's practices and also designing for a better future for tomorrow?
Yes, thank you, Claudia. That was a great question. Yeah, so I have been working. So my practice is often really around like critiquing what are we seeing that today, like challenging the status quo, because I believe that this is not what we want to reproduce for the future, right? So my speculative practice sometimes take a leap into the future to opening up a space for imagination, in order to sort of like look back at the present and critique the present and basically make a difference in the present then. Yeah. So definitely like some of the what I do as well is also like trying to find out other design practices that we could use today, which beyond, for instance, like a human-centered design approach. I hope that answered a little bit.
Yeah, okay, great. Then we have a question from Peter. What technology did you use to implement Aya? I'll just quickly say it.
Thank you, Peter, for that question. So actually, Aya is a speculative design. So it's not implemented. It's implemented in a way that it works as a video that like gets our our thoughts to start. We start thinking, right, and we start reflecting. So it was actually more like a mock-up where I just had text-to-speech program run, and then I was working with Arduino hardware and software to program different colors in response. But this is also to say you don't need to be an AI expert to speculate and develop some of these visions. Like I'm just learning now or practicing now machine learning. But previously I have not been like, so to say, materially exploring that through the programming, but that's something that I'm trying to learn now. So you don't need a PhD in AI or computer science to do this.
Okay, great. So are there any more follow-up questions just on an information level? You can raise your Mana, okay. I'll unmute you.
Hi, thank you so much for the great talk, and I really enjoyed it, especially the last talk. I absolutely agree with you that we need more diversity in positions of power and decision making. But my question is that what is happening is that we have then companies, for instance, an organization doing the work of looking more diverse, but actually not really giving power to those voices that are more critical. For instance, AI ethics researcher at Google left a couple of months ago. And of course, it looked very good for the company to have her a POC woman as well, but not really having her voice heard. So what do you think? I don't know, I'm curious to hear, what do you think the way is forward, to push these more critical voices in?
I think that's a really great comment and questions. And I think it's not enough to sort of like just try to balance the numbers, right? Because that's not that doesn't make a change. We need to have women in the leading roles in these companies to make a difference. And then, yeah, I mean, if you don't have the freedom to practice your critique from within, because it might be easy enough or safe enough to do it as a researcher position working at a university, but if you don't have the freedom to do that from within, then I'm not really sure actually what to do. But I think we just need to keep holding these big companies responsible for these problems that they are creating. But I don't have an answer, not a formulated answer yet.
I think this is a good time. We're jumping into our Q&A, so we might as well continue. You can also now raise your hand if you just want to start the conversation and also address all of our speakers. This is the Q&A where we're all together. We have some questions already coming in also from YouTube. From Natalia: when I'm making a design decision, big or small, what is one question I can ask myself to make sure I include the feminist or marginalized perspective?
I would look at if you start with finding out how you believe in, what kind of like feminism that you are agreeing with, that's a good point to start with, I would say, because there's also a lot of different kinds of feminism. But one great question to ask yourself is definitely like, who are you designing for? And design is, as I see it, is sort of like supposed to serve specific people. And if those people are the people who are already in power or who are already privileged, then it's definitely not feminists. So try to design for those people that you want to see supported.
And I would also say, I'm no designer, but I would also say, watch out for the implications of images of the future, because you can always deconstruct them. And for whom is this a great future, and for whom is this a dystopia? Because there are always like two sides of a coin.
I would answer the question with, is it usable for everybody? So can everybody use this one? This was the one I tried to say. Criado Perez wrote in a book that the seat belts in cars are just designed for men. And I think that's a good point to start if you design something. is it usable? Is it practical for everybody?
Yeah, that's very important. All the designers out there, write this down. Okay, so our next question, oh, there's so many coming in already. We had one all the way up here from Claudia, actually. Claudia, you had a question on the concept of linearity of future. I will unmute you again. There you go.
Yeah, that was more a question to the first talk, because you also have been addressing the limitations of future designs. And my thought at this point in time was also, do you have any thoughts about also challenging beyond the male-female distinction, the concept of designing futures in itself? Because lots of critics are also around, we do challenge our speculative futures against the normal, and we're just going to take the linear prediction of what's today into the future. So therefore, I just want to bring in the thought of circularity as one point to be mentioned about speculative futures as well.
I will directly answer it. Yeah, I think it's very, very important to stress that out, that we have a hegemonic narrative of how we see or how we describe future in its linearity. There is one person, Pupul Bisht. She's the founder of the Decolonising Futures Initiative, and she's one of the few futures researcher who invented like a speculative futures method, not from a Western perspective, but inspired by a way of narrating from an Indian community. So this is a great example where you can see that there are other concepts of time, but that's still a niche, I would say.
Great, thank you. Another question, also from YouTube. Do you ever think of technology's feelings and how these might develop in the future?
Maybe that was a question for me. I don't know if I believe in technologies having feelings, but I definitely think that whatever we are considering that they might be feeling will affect how human are feeling, if that makes sense. So that's also why, for instance, if we're talking about voice assistants that are feminized, then that's sort of like, that's also something that Sophia Noble has said. They're a socializing tool for people, how to talk to someone else, or what kind of response that they will give. It's a socializing tool that teaches us a certain thing about language. So the feelings are still there somehow. I'm not sure if they're like in the technology or if they're in us, but the feelings are distributed across.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is by Abigail. What futures imaginaries are not yet being criticized through an intersectional feminist lens? I'll post it again underneath so that you all can see it, because it's hard. Maybe this is a question to everyone, but yeah, Marie-Louise, you can start.
Yeah, I wanted to just start with saying that I think, and this is pointing to one of the comments that came into the chat as well, from Amalia D. Goodson, to be aware of one's own privileges, and understanding your own position of power, because when I see what kind of like future imaginings that I'm imagining, they're definitely shaped by my lived experience of being a cisgender white woman in a Scandinavian country, right? So some futures I'm not aware that I'm not aware of. But I think we're definitely seeing a lot of future imaginaries generally from the northern hemisphere, from a lot of white researchers, including me. So I think that's definitely a place to start looking beyond that.
For example, the curriculum of the masters, like future studies, there is, as far as I know, there are not a lot of discourses like racism, like sexism, like there is an interplay between various categories. The category class is often not seen enough. And I also would say the whole concept of progress is very limited to a Western perspective. And I stated one example, the female shift. That is a very dominant trend, like a dominant image of the future, as you can see that women will like conquer the world, but which women? What is meant with women? And that's the same direction as Marie-Louise just commented on.
I think future studies are a young discipline. It's not an old discipline. And so we always have to look for our biases and our visions for future studies. If we look to the historian studies, they discussed all these things 25, 30 years ago. And now they have a lot of disciplines they are discussing in colonization, medicine, any kind of feminism. And I think future studies is young, and so we have to take our time, but we will take our place. And maybe there are a lot of futures and there are a lot of future studies. So this is my opinion.
Now I just thought about the question a bit more. And one thing that I've been interested in exploring is the future imaginaries of care robots and sex robots, and the kind of like, in the imaginaries for who they're developed for and how they're developed. And in that perspective, I've been doing some future speculation into an aging population and their sexual desires, because and there's also a perspective of ageism in this, really thinking about human beings as also sexual, and also even if you are coming in an older age. So I think care robots and like, if we're talking about technology, the futures of them is very, very important to look at.
Because you're speaking also about sex robots and care workers in that sense, I'm just linking the question now to Patrick's, not directly correlated, but he's asking a question about solar punk. And he's asking if you see an overlap between today's presentations and visions put forward in solar punk. It's the last question that we had here.
Can Patrick say more about solar punk?
Yeah.
Otherwise, I have to Google it quickly.
No, it's kind of a more. It's actually you mentioned. I think you mentioned that it was privilege of Scandinavian countries versus more southern or any other regions of the globe. And solar punk is often more, it originated in part from Brazil, so it's often more southern, more inclusive, and not necessarily completely positive, but looking more at how we can get out of the current situation more than looking at dystopias. So it's probably more of a, other version of science fiction than another version of futurism, but I see them quite close. And so since it's often more inclusive, I was wondering if any of you saw overlap in the feminist futures you mentioned.
There are a lot of papers coming about feminist futures and science fiction. I think science fiction is a very important part of speculative futures. And maybe you know, or maybe you can Google it, Wenzel from the University der Künste. Maybe Franzi, you can write it in the chat. He is a very good person for science fiction and speculative futures. And yes, there are a lot of things in common, and a lot of people, future researchers, are science fiction authors too. But I think for feminist futures, there is a long way to go. So Patrick, you can go. Maybe it's your turn to write a science fiction feminist future.
Well, you always have Ursula Le Guin, but I don't know, she doesn't consider herself totally a female futures researcher. She's like in German, I would say Tausendsasser. So she can do a lot. Who has yeah.
Okay, maybe you want to add her name as well into the chat. And then we had a question from Peter Vasilko. Maybe you want to tell us your question into the chat. I'll unmute you.
Yes, I was asking, how do we balance interest when, for example, opening women's sports to trans athletes to avoid discriminating against them leads to their dominating women's sports and scholarship opportunities that were intended for biological women?
I think that might have been a bit quick, at least for me. Maybe you can repeat that again a little bit more slowly.
Sorry about that. How do we balance interests when, for example, opening women's sports to trans athletes to avoid discriminating against them leads to their dominating the women's sports and scholarship opportunities that were intended for biological women? There's like a huge thing happening in the United States now. And, you know, both sides have very strong claims, but clearly the result is a conflict that we have to deal with, and we're not sure how.
So I would now I'm not in the sports policy world, but for me, trans women are women and should be allowed to compete in the women's sports discipline. But I know this is something that researchers are very much looking into in terms of like hormone levels and measuring that and so on. But yeah.
We're seeing lots of interviews of female athletes who've been competing for their whole lives. We're hoping to get a scholarship from the women's sports to be able to get into university, and suddenly they're just unable to compete with the biological advantage that the trans athletes have over them. So it's very problematic, because the result is genetic men seizing all the scholarships and a whole class of female athletes feeling that the rug has been pulled out from under them.
Well, I think that this is definitely a big conversation that we can turn into a whole nother event on its own. We
want to be fair to everyone, but at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's why it's such a problem to even have like the researchers. There's no right or wrong or like not a definite answer there yet. And I think we will go into a huge discussion if we're trying to answer this question right now. But maybe you can continue this after the event and reach out either on our channels or reach out to any of the speakers or all of the speakers and continue this. But it's already almost 8 o'clock. So if we want to still give other people a chance, then I think I would move the question along. People can still raise their hands as well. Otherwise, I will just keep looking in the chat what is going on here. Also, the conversation is kind of going on in the chat right now. It's a lot of valuable input added here. So thank you for that. So I'm going up. Okay. Gunyan Singh, you had a question. I will unmute you next.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, this is a very interesting discussion because, you know, we have so many lenses from which we can look at feminist futures. And I was thinking, because I work a lot with Agile and how it has been bad-mouthed, but also used in software development. But they started with a manifesto and everybody took things of what they wanted to from it and kind of worked to create their own version of it, so as to say. It doesn't mean it works or not, but it would be nice because different people in different parts of the world, as we say, have different lived experiences. How could we start from a set of principles or some sort of manifesto where we say, okay, when you're thinking of a feminist future narrative, think of this, A, B, C, D. I'm just thinking if you all have come across something of that sort in your studies, in your research. Okay, yeah, I see something Franziska wrote. Thank you so much, Franziska.
Okay, great.
But I'm not sure if that's the answer to your question.
I don't know about it. I have to go look it up. So, but if that's where it's to start, I will go look it up. Thanks.
And maybe if it isn't, then you can message die Zukunftsforscherin and ask for more information. Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. Anyone else have any more questions?
Maybe I can comment a bit on this. I'm not sure if I've got it right, but I would say that it's definitely important to have a plurality of feminist perspectives within future studies, because there is a broad field. I try to make that very clear that you don't have only one category to look into, but a lot of questions, a lot of bias. So maybe it's time to just have an open discussion about all of our biases and not like I think it's more important to have the questions as a first step, and then we can try to have the answers, like, I don't know, later, female and female. What do you mean with your last question, Stephanie, in the chat? The definition of female?
Yes, exactly, Franzi. This is what I meant. I meant unequal, that female is unequal female, that we might have to totally question our assumptions. What is woman? What is, I think we've been trained in certain ways in our societies, wherever our societies are, in certain ways, how we are. And I think actually female and male, I don't think it's only the one, but it's also the other, and we have to rethink who we are. And I think it's really good to start with this female perspective and dig deeper, and I think we'll find out a lot. There's actually a new book out, it's only in German, Female Choice. That's quite interesting because it's from a biologist who's kind of trying to look
Maike Overbeck.
Yeah, exactly. And I just started it, but I think it's very interesting the way she sees things because it's not so straightforward. It's very ambiguous, and I think ambiguous, the wrong word, sorry, the very yeah. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, totally agreed.
Yeah, thank you. There's so many reading opportunities being filled in this chat. I think, yeah, we're going to be so busy after this session tonight. Jennifer has another question. Not to say, it's already 8 o'clock. I will look in the chat if there's still some more before that, but Jennifer, the floor is open for you. I think you can speak now.
Hi, yeah, basically, so besides the still problem of companies giving preference to men and hiring men and choosing them in leadership positions, what else do you think that causes the lack of women in technology and AI field?
I think I'm no expert in AI, but I think it's about the gender performances. It's about the gender stereotypes because everyone is talking about them since the age of, I don't know, 1 month. It's a very clear world, like divided into a male and female perspective, and you have to like perform your gender performance every day. And I think these myths are very difficult to deconstruct. This takes years, or for me, it takes years, or my whole life, I don't know. And that's why a lot of women are convinced that they do not have the competence to work in AI or technological fields because of being a woman.
It's starting when you work with children. It's how you speak with your children about technology and AI. It's how you teach them to be open-minded for everything. Is your daughter just interesting in puppets, or is she interesting in technology? So I think that's a very, very strong point. And for me, I'm from the former GDR, so we were not like trained, but we had a lot of different interests in our school when we were little kids. So everybody from us was like working with wood and working in the garden. And so I think these are all possibilities to speak with children, to teach them that everything is open.
That also goes back to the question that Stephanie also raised a while back. She wondered if the statistic on women working in the field of AI goes back to girls in school, or because they're still not encouraged to study STEM subjects. And I think it really plays into this again as well.
There is a project in Germany, it's called STEAM on Edu. I think it's an European project, and it's like a part of possibilities for young women in tech.
Yeah, I wanted to just add that, yeah, and agree that it starts very early, and it continues at the university as well. We don't see so many women and non-binary folks applying to the technology and educations. And maybe it's also because you see these terrible examples of AI, right? Like how it's used. And maybe that's also something you see and you're not maybe ready to go in and change it. But that's what we also need, right? To keep saying that this can be changed. It's not determined that just because those technologies are like that today, they're going to be it in the future. We need to say that there is actually or believe in the hope for a possibility for it to change, right? And that's why we need to see more women as well in the research and development of these technologies.
Yeah, I think that's also a big part, besides of not having maybe the equal opportunities to even go into this field, or because you're discouraged at an early age that this is not something for you. Also, maybe not even thinking the way AI is used right now is not, it's not done in an equal way. It's, if I think about AI, I don't think it's actually almost like for me. I almost don't want to use it. And I guess that also plays a part in that as well. I would say, as it's 8 past 8, we can have a final question, which I think kind of sums it up quite well. From YouTube, hello from California. Perhaps a broad question, but how do you hope to see speculative design and future studies creating change and impacting mainstream design as they continue to develop? I'll add it back into as a last question, so you can, oh no, that's the wrong one. Here. There. Could also be a question to all three of you, maybe, as like finishing words, some encouraging words.
I will. So I would say that from the also the academic and education perspective, I'm trying as much as possible at the universities and design schools where I'm working to get speculative design and more like critical approaches to design implemented into the educations, and really get the future designers to think in a more systemic way, and to apply feminist ideas into their work. So I see it impacting mainstream design as they also come out and work there. And I also see chapters like these impacting mainstream design, because I hope people from the industry are taking part in it, right? And in that way, I hope it makes a difference.
I would say that what we need is our like feminist counter narratives. We need positive images of how the world could be seen and how the world could be shaped, how it could be described when a future is feminist. What I'm trying to do is to empower like groups who aren't already in charge. That's like my one goal, one of my goals, I don't know, but and I think it's very important to always have this critical perspective on what someone is stating as that's always going to be like this, and this is the only way to do it, so let's do it differently.
I think it all starts with questions. So just start to ask questions. How does it feel for me? How does it feel for the others? Is this something? Is it something interesting? Is it something new? Is it for women? For who is it? For whom is it? So I think for me, it always starts with a question.
Greetings to the feminist sun.
Okay, so I think on this note, we will finish up here. I hope that you can take something away from this, more than one thing. You have a big reading list to take home now, and I'm going to. We just had a question if we can export the chat. I think what I'm going to do is I will send out an email to all the people that joined with kind of like a list of the recommendations that we added in the chat in the following days. if so you make sure nothing is missed. I would say continue asking those questions and be critical, and also be critical of your own work. And Marie-Louise asked, like, you know, are you a feminist, and are you implementing feminism in your work? And I think this is a big question that we can maybe all ask ourselves, and maybe wonder how we can maybe bring this into our work. And even if it's not the actual content that we're dealing with, but see how we can make an effort, no matter who we are, no matter what gender. I think it's very important. And also my call for everyone here. Thank you so much for joining tonight. You will be able to watch it all over again because it's recorded. And yeah, if you have any more questions and you want to continue this, you know who you can reach. Yeah, thank you so much. Have a good night, and hopefully see you next time. And thank you,
Annika, for organizing all this. And thanks to Dodo and the gang. I read this in the chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Franziska, Alu, and Marie-Louise. It was amazing having you here, and I really loved the Q&A. Yeah, just a really good match. Thank you so much for your input and your time. And to everyone else's time, yeah, have a good evening, and yeah, until next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.